And so we move to the 2014 edition of the Championships, due to start in Aberystwyth in a little under a week's time. To me, this is going to be a very tightly contested event. I note that there are 58 entrants so far, including 7 Grandmasters, 5 International Masters, 4 FIDE Masters, and a host of other strong players. For some, it's going to be hard to look past last year's winner, David Howell. But with Grandmasters the quality of Nick Pert, Mark Hebden, Simon Williams, John Ems and Chris Ward following him, then I don't think one can guarantee any result. For me though, I'm going to choose another player. My pre-tournament favourite is going to be Grandmaster Keith Arkle, who is having an absolutely fabulous year. Keith won the European Seniors in Portugal earlier in the year, and he's currently representing England in a Seniors Championship in Vilnius. Perhaps the only drawback to this is that he's got a rush from Vilnius all the way back to Aberystwyth to take part in the Championships. But that sort of thing is normal for Keith. Whereas most players will become stale with the amount of chess Keith plays, Keith seems to relish playing tournament after tournament after tournament. And this year, in 2014, his play seems to be getting stronger than ever. Keith is regarded as a player with immensely good technique. His endgame technique is legendary. But the game I'm about to present shows that he's also a tremendously talented tactician. And it's a very interesting game to boot. It comes from the High Wycombe E2-E4 Open tournament played in 2013. And Keith is black against Grandmaster Alexander Chernayev, who, as any player on the British circuit knows, is incredibly difficult to beat with black. So Chernayev opened with 1e4, and Keith played his favourite Caro-Can defence, a line which seemed to suit him down to the ground. Chernayev took on d5 and played the Panov-Botvinnik attack, allowing Arkle again to play one of his favourite variations, g6. A move that in 2014 is actually given pretty short shrift in the theoretical manuals. Not thought to be that good for black, but Keith likes it and he's played it with great success over the years. And as might be expected, Chernayev plays the most challenging move, Queen to b3. Now in fact in 2013 Arkle racked up a tremendous score with this line. Some players took on d5 and then played Queen b3. Perhaps this is a slightly less accurate move order for white, and in the games against Jay Hughes and Jay Jackson, Arkle dropped back his knight to b6. Hughes, in the game from Penarth 2013, played bishop b5 check. And this looks like the move of a man who is quite happy just to get his pieces out and settle for an equal position out of the opening. But with the isolated queen's pawn, white can't really just routinely exchange the pieces, get his pieces out and expect that routine development is going to do for him. This sort of thing plays right into Arkle's hands, who likes nothing better than to slowly grind the position out. Queen d7 was played, both sides castled, and black got a very respectable position from the opening after rook fd1, h6, bishop f4, and now rook to d8. White hasn't really made any progress in this position and faces a siege of his isolated queen's pawn. And of course Keith went on to win this game in 33 moves as black. Objectively it's equal, but this is the sort of position that suits Keith Arkle. In Arkle's game against James Jackson from Brighton in 2013, white played d5. Again, a move which looks like a premature advance. I'm doubtful whether this type of move is going to guarantee white anything more than an equal position. And indeed, in Jackson versus Arkle, black soon built up a nice game by just playing routine moves really. After rook d1, Arkle played the probing bishop g4. And Jackson probably didn't want to exchange pieces at this stage because he knows that he's still got this isolated queen's pawn to worry about. So he played rook d2, Arkle played knight a6, h3, the bishop came back, Jackson developed his knight, rook came to c8, and after bishop e2, knight c5, black completed a well played and successful opening with at least equality. Again, this is the type of position that suits Keith, playing against the isolated queen's pawn. So it was no surprise that he went on to win this game as well. But going back to Chimaev Arkle, okay, Chimaev plays Queen B3. That's the most challenging move. And the point is that when black plays Bishop G7, white's going to take this pawn on D5 and try to make life difficult for black, actually regaining the pawn. Yes, black's position's very together. He's got nice free development, but as long as that pawn on D5 remains on the board, then black can't get his minor pieces to ideal squares. He's got to work a way around that pawn and try to get to a respectable position. Well, again, Chimaev played one of the most challenging moves here, knight G to E2. And that's challenging because although white blocks in his bishop, he's probably going to think about playing G3 and bishop G2, and if need be, knight to F4. Just hanging on to that pawn on D5 for all it's worth and asking black how he's going to regain it. Instead, bishop E2 is also thought to be a good move, with the idea after knight BD7 of playing bishop F3. But in the game Pleasance versus Arkle, Penarth 2013, again black got a very respectable position after knight B6, knight GE2, and now the key move, bishop G4. This forces an exchange on G4, and now it's actually quite difficult for white to hold this pawn long term, as black can surely bombard the pawn by just bringing his knight back to F6, queen up to D7, and then rook to D8. And of course, if he gets the pawn on D5, again he's going to have a favourable position due to the isolated queen's pawn. So I think the reason Arkle plays this line is that he's forcing his opponents to play very, very accurately if they want to maintain an advantage. And this, of course, technically weaker players than Keith can't really do. That's why he racks up the points. In Pleasance versus Arkle, white continued with bishop F4, and now perhaps the easiest route to a nice position is just to bring his knight back to F6. In the game, actually, Keith played knight H6, intending to redeploy the knight to F5. But after that, I quite like A4, and then A5, as a way of developing an initiative for white. So, knight F6 will be better, and then if D6, we just chop it off. White castles, rook E8. To me, this looks satisfactory for black. About equal. Well, going back to Chimaev versus Arkle one more time. White played knight E2. Black brought his knight out to A6. And after bishop F4, an interesting move in itself, that move seems to contradict the main ideas of this line. I must say I have to prefer G3 there. But anyway, Chimaev played bishop F4. Arkle played a counterintuitive move, queen to B6. Not a move that would occur to everyone, but Arkle revels in queenless middle games. Not only that, when the queens come off, black has some threats, the most serious of which is knight to B4. As you can see, eyeing up numerous weaknesses in white's camp. So Chimaev played D6. Could he have done better? Well, actually, the threat of knight B4 is pretty strong. If white goes rook D1 here, then I think black can consider either knight B4 or probably rook D8 first, which to me looks slightly better. If white tries to jettison his weakness with D6, we just take it. And if G3, only now do we play knight B4. And after A3, because black's threatening that pawn maybe, knight BD5, bishop G5, rook E8. Again, black reaches a good position. The white king is stuck in the middle. It's going to take white some time to unravel. Meanwhile, black's got ideas of bishop G4, which are quite awkward for white to meet. It's all very well white trying to settle on this position and protect his pawn, but that costs him time. And meanwhile, the black development is very fast. So, going back to the game itself, Chimaev plays D6, and Keith comes straight in with knight to B4. That's the main point of sticking the knight on A6 in the first place, and as you can see, black has lots of threats. Black could also take on D6 for sure, and play rook D8, and if bishop E7, go rook D7. Now obviously if white takes on F6, black is in business with the two bishops, and still knight B4 in the wings, and if white plays bishop A3, then maybe knight D5 is okay for black. But Keith likes to create threats. He goes knight B4, allowing white to take on E7, and now rook to E8. So this is a game where if you were asked to identify the player playing black, you gave a list of players. I don't think you picked Keith Arkle if you didn't know he played this line as the player with behind the black pieces, simply because it's a tactical melee. But Keith understands with the white king stuck in the middle, he's always going to have very good chances, despite the fact that he's 2 pawns down. Well, of course, it's quite hard for white to hold both of those pawns. Should I have played rook d1? I think he's probably already finding this position quite difficult to handle. Rook takes e7, and now a3 was played. Just to give you an example of how quickly this position can become difficult for white, let's have a look at bishop d6, which perhaps was what Chimaev wanted to play, but then he saw knight c2 check, king d2, rook d7, which at the very least is awkward for white. The rook comes to the same file as the white king, and after bishop e5, the knight just retreats to b4. And if a3, we have check. Again, very awkward for white to meet. f4, and now knight g4. The bishop finds itself stranded on e5, with f6 as a definite threat. Knight takes e5 wins a piece due to the double pin on the pawns at f4 and d4. White is in serious trouble here. So back we go to the game. Something similar actually happens in this game, funnily enough. White plays a3. Black puts his knight on d5, and now white tries to shut the position down with bishop e5. Bishop f5, continuing fluid development. And now white plays h3. Bishop h6. The first sign that black is really thinking about trying to round this bishop up on e5 in certain circumstances. And definitely about moving his knight from f6 at the right moment, playing f6 and getting that e-file open all the way down to the white king. White plays g3. Again, very slow, and Arkle latches onto the slowness and plays the dynamic move, bishop c2. Again, an extremely awkward move for white to meet. Chimaev played a rather miserable move in the game, rook a1, but already this position is quite difficult. I think if white wants to stay on the board, he's probably got to sacrifice the exchange, which again is a very hard judgment call to make. I actually think the best move here is to play bishop g2 and just give the exchange on d1. People might throw up their hands in horror at this judgment call, but white's bishop on g2 is very strong. White's already got a pawn for the exchange, and black's pawns are doubled. So it's not that easy for black to realise any sort of material advantage here. And for instance, after bishop g7, king c2, rook a d8, I evaluate this position as equal, despite the extra exchange for black. It's very, very difficult for black to get his rooks into the game without his queenside pawns dropping off. So perhaps this is what Chimaev should have done, but would you have done it after bishop c2? It's a very difficult decision to make. But after rook a1, it just goes downhill as Keith moves in with knight e4. Very dynamic indeed. And now the threat of f6 looms large. Of course, the immediate threat is more pressing. Bishop d2, checkmate. So Chimaev tries to block the bishop out with f4. Then comes knight d takes c3. And if b takes c3, we see this trap again. f6. Horrible for white. So Chimaev's forced to take back with the knight. Black takes on g3, and once he gets one of his pawns back in a position like this, the whole white position collapses. It's all gone. As you can see, white's got no coordination. f6 is a threat. After rook h2, there came bishop b3. Holes all over the place. And after knight h5, Chimaev was so disgusted with the position that he decided to resign. Black has numerous threats. I mean, this is not a resignable position, but it's not very nice for white to play. Black's threatening f4. Black's threatening perhaps f6. The pawn on d4 looks very weak. White's king is very weak. The Grandmaster had had quite enough of the pounding, so he resigned. Well, there we are. You know, Keith has a varied game, and he could well win the British Championship, but I'm sure that players of the calibre of David Howell will have something to say about that. Anyway, I hope you'll join me for daily Game of the Day commentary in a few days' time in Aberystwyth, and that you've enjoyed these preview videos. We look forward to the 2014 British Chess Championship. It should be a good one.